Class News Network. Today we will be discussing a topic that frequently appears in today's time. To be specific, bias in hiring the mentally ill. While many biases exist in the hiring world, especially with the constantly changing fashion scene or the changing lingo in texting and emailing, the bias we will be talking about today is bias against hiring the mentally ill. When thinking about someone who is mentally ill, some of the first thoughts that come to mind are negative work ethic, being lazy, cannot being able to perform well, or not being reliable. While this does happen from time to time, it is not common. And these are negative stereotypes that prevent those with mental illnesses from getting the jobs that they need to in order to support themselves. Now, the first question that needs to be asked is, what is bias? Now, we will be turning it over to Stephanie for this part.
Thanks, Adriana. What exactly is bias? According to the Britannica Dictionary, bias is the tendency to believe that some people, ideas, etc., are better than others. That usually results in treating some people unfairly. Sometimes biases can be taught by parents or guardians, teachers, also developed from learning facts, or by the most common that we see in today's generation is persuasion by others around them. When it comes to the topic at hand, hiring the mentally ill, research has proven that employees with mental illnesses are met with unequal pay as well as higher unemployment rates.
That occur when a social, economic, or other characteristic label is attributed to an individual or a group of individuals sharing a particular quality. Compared to non-stigmatized individuals, people with mental illness often face discrimination when being interviewed and considered for jobs. A portion of the bias stems from employers looking to secure liable employment opportunities. In a study conducted in 2006 by Han and Trisinar, employers were reluctant to hire employees that suffer from mental illnesses. This was primarily due to their concerns regarding how these individuals would react under pressure and if it would affect their overall work performance. Not only do people with mental illnesses have to deal with their symptoms, but they also must overcome the discrimination from potential employers during the job hunting process. In their 2006 study, McAlpine and Warner reported that about 36% of employees with mental illnesses were faced with blatant discrimination. Mentally ill individuals experience high rates of unemployment and unequal pay. In addition, there are also other factors that contribute to unemployment. Some mental illnesses leave their host with a lack of basic cognitive skills. This leads to employers to make this assumption about everyone with a psychiatric disability. There are ways to combat the bias in hiring the mentally ill. However, it is important to note that this issue can never be permanently eradicated. For instance, education is a prime example, and personal contact can help fight the stigma. It was reported by Koslik, Corrigan, and Landis in 2014 that employees who had positive interactions and beliefs about PMI were more willing to employ them. In the study conducted in the article, 249 participants over the age of 18 who had experience with hiring employees took a series of questionnaires to determine their outlook on hypothetical job candidates' performance levels. These questionnaires discussed topics such as stereotypes about people with mental illness and evaluating employees' general work performance. This research was approved by the Texas Tech University Human Research Protection Program. Participants were recruited from two sources: randomly selected affiliate chapters of the Society for Human Resource Management and Qualtrics Panel Management. All participants were then instructed to read one of 4 case vignettes describing a hypothetical job candidate who was either an individual with a history of mental illness, an individual with prior criminal involvement, an individual with both mental illness and criminal involvement, or neither mental illness or criminal history, i.e., the healthy control condition. Consistent with the unemployment And consistent with the employment outcomes, results of the general stigma outcomes showed that participants tended to prefer more social distance between themselves and the applicant with both a psychiatric and criminal history. This result occurred regardless of training exposure. Combating the issue of unemployment among discriminated populations by modernizing legal policies and enhancing educational practices for both employees and employers is likely to have a significant impact at both the individual and community levels. Why don't employers hire and retain workers with mental illness? When it comes to mental illness, it is a serious thing. This article explains how certain people with mental illnesses aren't as reliable in the majority of any workforce. Some of the reasons why employers don't hire workers with disabilities are because they don't know how to help or even handle the disability. According to Jaya Cooper Hobby, about 25.4% of people agree about employers not knowing how to handle a person with needs. The article also explains that there are helpful employers who are willing to help those who are in need, but it is not many that will consider doing that. In the article, it states that 1/4 of people aren't as helpful and don't have patience. People who suffer from mental illness don't always leave a good impression. The article also explains that not as many people will think that people with mental illnesses don't perform well in interviews. About 3.9% of the people agree with that, and about 12.4% disagree with that. Some people believe that people with mental illnesses don't leave a bad impression in interviews. The article states that employers want employees who are flexible and can do more than one task at a given time. Employers do not want to hire those who have special needs because they feel like they can't do too many tasks on their own and aren't as reliable as someone who doesn't have any mental illness or disabilities. According to the article, about 65.1% agree that people who have or develop any mental illnesses or disabilities can no longer work because they will not be able to function properly to do any basic tasks in the workplace. The article also explains why employers are afraid to hire them, and one of the reasons is that everyone can or know how to handle people with special needs. Not everyone has the knowledge to, and that could be a huge problem. There are many reasons as to why employers would not want to hire people with mental illness or disabilities. They think that the disabled employee will not get the job done as quickly and efficiently as someone who isn't disabled. They will also need a lot of assistance and guidance to help them. Employers feel that it takes too much time and too much work to deal with them, work and time they don't want to have to pay.
Hello, I am David Moore.
Nice to meet you, David. I'm Bruce Fraser.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
All right. Regarding mental illnesses, and are you willing to hire these kind of people? All right. So the first question is, do you think that there is biasness in mental illness hiring?
Well, first of all, people who have a mental illness are not required to disclose that in an interview. So it typically is not the kind of thing that would even come up as a consideration. I think where mental illness would be a consideration is with someone that I've already hired, who then demonstrates a kind of behavior that's indicative of mental illness, right? Okay. So now with respect to your question about bias, I think we need to define what bias means. Right, so by bias, I'm assuming you mean a propensity, usually unconscious, to avoid certain kinds of behaviors in favor of others, right?
Yes.
Or an inclination to accept certain ideas versus others, even if there's evidence to the contrary. I don't know if there's bias against people with mental illness. I'd say that there's generally a social stigma. Whether that translates into bias, I'm not sure. I think it depends on the institution. If an institution like ours, for example, is following the guidelines for hiring, then I think those guidelines are really intended to factor out bias. However, in plenty of institutions, I think if people suspect that someone is a little different, that they might not fit into the culture, and that could include mental illness, but many other things as well, personality traits and so on, there very well could be bias.
Yeah. And well, in the term of biasness, I would assume so that you want a most effective, efficient worker, right? You want someone who is on top of things, of course.
Yeah, you're looking for someone who's going to do the job well.
Right. And if someone who has like a depression disorder, obviously that's going to get in the way of stuff.
I don't know that it's obvious that that would get in the way. I think that if depression is carefully managed, if there's a good working relationship between a person and their supervisor, if there's a healthy organizational culture, people could work very effectively and still suffer from depression. And I think that that is reinforced by the fact that depression is so widespread and these people work. You know, I think many of them are effective. But you're right. I mean, there are times when people suffer depression or maybe anxiety to a point where they may take sick days. They may not be as effective in their job. So yeah, that kind of thing certainly does arise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so have you or someone you have known been turned down a job due to mental illness?
No. That's the simple answer. I have never been turned down because of mental illness. I don't suffer from mental illness that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And others may disagree, but I don't know anyone who's been turned down from mental illness. I do know people who have left jobs because they've suffered from mental illness.
Hello, my name is Connor. May I ask your name?
My name is David. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. The first question I want to ask is, do you have any biases against those who are mentally ill?
No.
All right. Do you think those who are mentally ill cannot perform well or as good as their non-mentally ill peers in the workplace?
I think that if they're trained correctly and properly, they can just perform just as well and just as fine as anybody else.
Right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
There, my name is David. We are working on a project right now, and you are?
My name is Dr. Patty Corey, and I am the Director of Student Health Services at Indian River State College.
Awesome. Do you mind if we ask you a couple questions?
Not at all.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you, is it okay that, like, basically, do you think when it comes to hiring mentally ill people, is there some sort of bias going on? Like, let's just say they think they're going to be inefficient, or like they're going to favor people who aren't mentally ill over people who aren't.
I think there's still bias against people who have mental health challenges, and it's unfortunate. Stigma plays a big part in that, and stigma has been around for years, forever. But unfortunately, people haven't either educated themselves about different mental illnesses, and that gives them bias. So my answer is yes to that question. But overall, I think for someone who has been diagnosed with a mental illness, as long as they're compliant with their treatment, doing what they need to do, they're excellent workers, excellent workers. And a lot of individuals, in my experience, I've found that they're highly intelligent. And that's one aspect that perhaps is overlooked when someone's talking about mental illness.
Oh, that's great. And do you believe that, like, let's just say, if someone got have you know anyone who's gotten turned down, I should say, like a job position because of their mental illness?
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. And if you see someone who has like a history of mental illness, not like the full-blown right now, like let's just say, for example, they had history of depression when they were younger, but they've gotten more under control it. Do you think that could like resurface during the job? And if so, is that gonna kind of interfere with what they think is right?
Well, depression, many people in our society are affected by depression, and it can, be more serious at different times than others. But in terms of hiring someone or working with someone with a mental illness, no. I think that a person as they present themselves, they let the potential employer know what they're capable of, what their goals are, and I think that that has to be the priority, is getting to know the person, what they're capable of, what they want to do, and how they can help your organization. That's much more valuable than looking at a past history.
That's great. All right. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And